guys, Matt here. Um, Again, I kind of like cast my eyes down the subject list on the channel and noticed that there was nothing sort of about God or religion or spirituality. So this talk I'm going to entitle it spirituality, right? Because I think that's a kind of overarching term for some of the areas that I'm going to be discussing. So that would be things like God, religion, animism, ghosts, unexplained phenomena, spiritism, spiritualism. We're going to look at metaphysics, philosophy, how that bears on this stuff. We'll talk about clairvoyancy, magic, and alchemy. We're going to talk a little bit about the kind of the hippie culture, the sort of counterculture, the look to the east from the west, the convergence of the two. I'm going to be looking at physics, maths, Pythagoras, some astrology. Then we'll talk about dualism, non-dualism, sort of cultural interpretations of spirituality and the sort of distinction between the spiritual realm and the physical realm. So dualism comes in again there. And also the kind of like the social divide between sort of religious practice and then non-religious practice, or secular practice. So, there's a lot to go through here, so it's going to take some time. I might do it in two parts, just see how this goes. Also, to apologise, I've noticed in some of my recordings I'm kind of clearing my throat and coughing quite a bit. I seem to have been having a sort of lingering sort of sinusitis and a bit of a cold from this endless winter we're having in Britain here. And so I think it's something to do with that. But just apologies in advance for any bothersome sort of coughing and so on. Right, so where should we start? So let's look at, so what does the term spirituality mean? I suppose in some sense I've just given you a list of topics that it sort of points towards. So, some people regard themselves spiritual if they're into astrology, or it's some sort of divination or tarot cards. They would say that that's spiritual because it's tapping into this kind of hidden realm of forces and potentially magic and so on that is unseeable to the standard sort of physical human eye. Okay. You've got people who regard themselves as spiritual simply because they're religious, right? They worship the Holy Spirit or the Holy Ghost or or Allah or Yahweh or and so on. So all these different kinds of supernatural entities that created the universe and therefore created ours, and they're sort of accountable for this whole deal, right? So these guys are obviously sort of under the sort of banner of spiritual, although there's some stuff in there I will contest later on. And then you sort of go around the clock a little bit and say, well, what about metaphysics? Now, I would suggest actually metaphysics and spirituality are connected, because I think that metaphysics deals in the fundamental nature of reality, and if you find yourself asserting things about the sort of substance that you believe reality to be. So, and in the case of idealists, and as everybody knows, I'm one of these. We state that the cosmos is mind or mental, and so that, for me, that at least sidles up against the religious view, which says that God is of spirit, right? I think they're kind of saying the same thing. I think the mind at large of idealism is really the God of religion. They're pointers to the same thing. And again, there's the Donald Hoffman sort of pointer thing again. So I would say that metaphysics has a dotted line to spirituality, and I know that there'll be a ton of philosophers who completely disagree with me there, right? Straight off the bat. I think philosophy itself has overlap with spirituality, certainly religion, theology, theocracy, theosophy, and so on and so forth. I think that it's okay to reason about the transcendent, right? So there's that. So spirituality. I'm saying that spirituality is a term that refers to practices about, or discussion about, or inquiry, or analysis, or investigation about the transcendent, right? And I say transcendent because it's the unseeable, or it's but only a glimpse at most, either from like an intense trip or sort of a near-death experience or traumatic episodes, epilepsy, starvation, and so on and so forth, suffocation, things that can bring about these kind of dissociate or non-dissociated potentially episodes where you you're no longer bound by your human sort of ego and identity. And you just sort of it's like you loosen from that particular frame of reference, and then you can see other things or experience other things that you can't in this ordinary kind of 3D point of view, right? So yeah, spirituality is a catch-all term to talk about the transcendent. And as I say, that covers all of these things, which may or may not be real. I'm not offering any kind of sort of assertion about that at this stage. I'll have opinions, of course. I think it's the it's the duty of philosophers to at least have opinions, to at least try to offer up a view of things. Right. So so let's start with sort of God and religion, right? Because I think that in some sense that's probably the biggest area, topic area of sort of spirituality, because it's just definitely about the transcendent, because the Godhead, the various different forms that God takes in these various customs, is a transcendent being. It is a kind of conscious entity that has cognition and willpower and can deliberately do things like create universes and do miracles and so on and so forth. I think most of the major religions would agree that there are miracles, perhaps with the exception of Buddhism, because they don't really have a deity as such. Although there's some depths here that we should explore going forward, because there's a hell of a lot to learn about Buddhism, or what it's really saying. But let's just say that God and religion are big kickers in the area of spirituality. Now, why do we have these things? Well, I suppose we'd have to start by sort of taking a look at sort of more primitive forms of worship. So look at things like animism, right? And within that area of thought, that it's often the case that these sort of animist tribes see spirits everywhere, right? In the rivers, in the mountains, in their food, in the animals that surround them, and so on and so forth. And so it is just the case that everything is kind of spiritual in some sense. There is nothing that is not affected by these gods and these entities that we can't quite see, but we have a kind of intuitive or instinctive feeling about, right? And then you've got things like sort of shamanism, where these the early sort of witch doctors, wise men of the tribes, and so on. And there's a lot of debate about what these guys did and what they were for, and so on and so forth. And there's lots of discussion about the Druids, but the key thing with these guys is that they seem to be about. Look, Druids were sort of keepers of knowledge and mathematics and astronomical wisdom and so on and so forth as well, and so were probably shamans. But there is this other area of shamanism to do with sort of the spirits and demons and healing and divination and clairvoyancy and so on and so forth. And the approach of the shaman would be to say, look, if someone turned up and they were feeling not particularly well, they would say, well, there's a spirit inhabiting you, and it's doing bad juju, so we've got to kind of persuade the spirit to leave you. And you can either do that, sort of chanting and scare the damn thing off, or maybe you could use drugs or some sort of poisons or something to try and drive it away, or just ask it politely, depending on the approach of the shaman and the nature of the affliction. But now, whilst the materialist scientists would say, well, this is just absolute nonsense, there are no evil spirits here, in some sense it doesn't really matter, right? If you can persuade a human body to do the right thing and to get the cells working in cohesion to deliver some sort of healing or regrowth or regeneration, then it doesn't matter how you do it, right? Who cares what the interface is if you can get that community of cells doing the right thing, right? And hence sort of modern things like sort of hypnodermatology, where we've talked about this before. The guy with horrifically black kind of necrotic tissue on his arm, horrendous eczema and so on and so forth. Literally, a hypnotherapist guy just persuaded his body to heal that up, and it did. I mean, it's just astonishing. I mean, Mike Levin's quoting this stuff, so this is empirically testable, right? But it turns out that this guy was he was the guy that was healed came back a few weeks later with other issues. And so I can't remember the name of the guy, but this particular hypnodermatologist gave it all up and took up psychology in the end, because he said, well, it looks to me like it's not body, it's minds that we need to fix, right? And again, sort of offering some support to these shamans. They approached everything as though it had agency, right? And you've now got kind of scientists saying, well, actually, it looks to us like some of these basal cognitive systems have agency, and sort of volition and so on, right? So it's this kind of, maybe the shamans were kind of right in some interesting way. So animism predated sort of the religions as we know them today, animism, shamanism, and so on. And of course, these traditions still continue through things like sort of Wicca and paganism and whatnot. But the real big kickers are obviously the big churches, the kind of the authorities on theology and so on. Like the Vatican City, all these guys, with their kind of hierarchies and their uniforms, and these religions are they're like nations, aren't they? They're kind of like nation states of the soul, right? And of course we know that they all argue and bicker among themselves about who's right, but they can work together as well and overlap, and many of them these days are very cosmopolitan and accept that these other faiths are just pointers to their same God, right? And they even acknowledge that, in spite of some of the scriptural interpretations and bickering and so on, they're really on the same side, right? So that's good to hear. It's good to see that that's the case. More the case these days, at least. But why is it there? I mean, I think that, look, for me, so I'm just going to sort of step into some of my core feelings about spirituality, right? Now, I don't think you can kind of separate the spiritual from the material. So you get these people who sort of go to church, say their Lord's Prayer and listen to the hymns and so on and so forth, and then get back to their sort of material habits, right? And that's their spiritual bit. So their spiritual bit of their life is kind of cordoned off, or it's compartmentalized into a Sunday and maybe some Friday night mass or something, and that kind of thing has never been able to work for me, right? So I just sort of think, look, if it is the case that there is a singular kind of transcendent intelligence of which we're all a part, and we can have access to that to a degree through meditation and ego destruction, so on and so forth, then everything is in fact spiritual, right? If we are all one mind, everything is spiritual. There is no division. Tapping away at a laptop is spiritual, right? Horrifically, throwing yourself off a building is spiritual. Getting born is spiritual. Walking along the road is spiritual, right? Because if we are these kind of like disembodied sort of conscious agents that live in this kind of non-spatial domain, as the likes of Hoffman and Kastrup and these people are saying, then this whole thing is kind of like a kind of a sea of agency, and that sounds very sort of spiritual, doesn't it? It's not the kind of, obviously the physicalist paradigm offers up this, n-dimensional manifold full of actual physical things or processes, right? And most spiritual people actually buy that as well. So you get, most people who worship us in, say, Britain today, I would say they're still materialists. They're kind of dualists, right? Or they're some sort of dualist, whether they think, well, there is a physical world because they've bought into that, because it's hard not to, given the success of mechanistic science, right? So they've bought into that, but they still believe in God. And and if you really think it through, that actually leads to a contradiction, because they end up with this sort of being kind of materialized in a sense and mechanized, and I've spoken to religious people who deny you're actually kind of quite heavy, quite materialist, and they actually think the universe is meaningless. And I'm like, well, why are you going to church? Well, because it gives me comfort. So they don't believe in the scripture and the metaphysics offered up, or the ontologies offered up by these churches. They just go along for the community, and that's fine. I completely get that, and I want to talk about that. And I think that, and I've just said indeed that going to church or not going to church is spiritual. Whether you do, you might say going to church allows you to sort of meditate or pray or get into that kind of trance-like state, whereas sitting in front of a I don't know, a biscuit making machine or something, and doing a boring repetitive job will not do that, but I don't buy that. I think once you realise what is really going on, or you've got a better understanding of what's really going on, which is that the universe is constituted out of these kind of temporarily dissociated alters, or agents, if you like, who themselves are sort of coagulations of lower scale agencies, who themselves are coagulations of lower scale agencies, and Friston seems to think it goes all the way down and all the way up. So, and I don't see why not. You certainly find yourself in a weird place of contradiction if you say, well, yeah, there is actually a bottom to this, and that's very hard to defend when you really think about it. Although this whole conversation about finite, discrete, geometric spaces, I need to get to talk to Wolfram. I want to get to talk to Tim Maudlin about this stuff. So I think the religion thing is about community. It's not fundamentally about metaphysical truth. I think they're pretty close to it. I think this idea of the Trinity is not far off. I think certainly just the high level concept of monotheism makes complete sense to me. There is one whole of which we're all a part, and and perhaps the likes of Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, these guys were kind of teachers who gave us pointers to these kind of these underlying truths, the nature of the wholeness, the deep interconnectedness of all things. And it's probably from these sorts of ideas that the idea of charity and egalitarianism and compassion emerged, right? Because if we say, well, yes, we're all one thing, we can almost feel the pain of hurting each other, because hurting each other is hurting ourselves, right? So I kind of used to really have it in for religion. I used to be, because I was raised Catholic, I saw the horrors that sort of went on. My uncles and aunties were beaten, at Catholic school. My mum didn't have a great experience with it. There was lots of judgment and scorn, and even kissing on the TV. It'd be like, "Ooh, get a room." It was the very kind of Victorian sort of mindset, but something really twisted up about it because it's just unnatural, isn't it, to behave like that? So, so I had a bad experience with religion growing up. And that just turned me against all religion. So I kind of threw everything in with science and philosophy and so on, and just I was a complete materialist. And I just thought, well, religion's evil. It causes all the wars and all the suffering. Shouldn't believe this nonsense. And I've kind of come full circle with that. Through looking at science and philosophy, digging deeper and deeper and deeper, you come back again to this notion that, well, actually, okay, there is this deep interconnection of all things. Whilst we look like we're wandering around isolated inside this massive, uncaring cosmos, when you do the thinking, you realise actually, no, you are the cosmos, right? So anyway, I'm more. My views on religion are much more complicated these days. I mean, I look to Islam and actually have admiration for it, because actually it seems to have held on more rigorously to its actual purpose, which is the spiritual element and the practice, and but then it lays down an extremely kind of demanding sort of regime, if you like, of its. But then but perhaps that's what you need to be able to enter that connection with the transcendent. So there's, but what I do admire about Islam is it's the energy that's still there within the actual spiritual practices. Whereas you go along to some of the, actually I would say exactly the same thing about perhaps the evangelical Christian churches. Actually there's energy there in that practice, and there's positive energy, and whereas actually go along to some of the Church of England things, you could just fall asleep during the sermons. The hymns are good, if a little dreary, but that passion for the practice and for the engagement of the transcendent doesn't seem to be there with modern Christianity. And again, no expert on this stuff. I haven't even studied. I've studied quite a bit of religion, and philosophy obviously overlaps with theology, which I say is a branch of philosophy, really. So I know a bit. So what else have we got? So there's this other bit of spirituality, which isn't sort of God and religion. It's not really philosophy or metaphysics. Well, maybe it's a little bit metaphysics, but it's basically ghosts. The sort of spiritism, spiritualism. The spiritualist churches. They do things like clairvoyancy, mediumship, rituals and things like that. And I just don't know what to make of this stuff. You get these kind of performers that contact people's dead and so on and so forth. I'm fairly confident in saying that I, you know, nearly all of them are just complete charlatans. And you can sit through and watch it, and the way they do the math, they do the odds, right? If you're in a room full of 200 people, there's going to be someone called Tom there whose grandfather called John died of a heart attack, right? And it's just, and you know, and because he gets the odd one right here and there, people think, he's onto something. But you know, it's not going to be guaroguaranteed, is it? Because it's going to be fuzzy, because it's talking to the spirit realm and all this kind of stuff. But I'm afraid to say, folks, it's bullshit, right? And I think some of these guys are actual real fucking arseholes. I mean, look, if it gives comfort to people, if it genuinely does, but it's still costing them money, and it is lied. I mean, I'd rather be told the truth and hurt than lied to and comforted, frankly. But that's you know, maybe I'm different. That's a philosophy thing, perhaps. So ghosts. Look. Look, it might be possible. I mean, I'm just saying the majority of these guys are charlatans, right? Well, I mean, I've had some strange experiences. I saw a strange shadow figure at my bedroom door when I was a child. I've had strange sort of repetitive dreams where the dream's content seemed to have overlap into this reality, but then slowly sort of disappear and stuff like that. Nothing major, but I do believe that people are experiencing these things, right? Because the number of reports of ghosts and sightings and UFOs and so on and so forth, I think that people are seeing or experiencing something, right? There can't be that many absolute lunatics that just want to go around lying and attention grabbing, right? I can't believe that's the case. And so I think something is being experienced, but I think what then happens is the human mind just kind of automatically wraps concepts and ideas around whatever this thing is they're experiencing. And so they see a dead relative, and so they see an old lady at the staircase, right? These kind of images, these sort of classic ideas about ghosts and stuff, you know, the white translucent figure and things like that. But actually, you know, there's a lot of accounts of these sorts of ghosts that aren't like that at all. People say, well, no, there was a solid being, you know, they were just like solid as anything else, right? So I think something's going on there, and I think that you know, it's very interesting, these UFO sightings over the years, they've caught up and they've kept up with the technology, right? So hundreds of years ago, people were seeing things like air balloons and stuff in the sky before Zeppelins had been invented and so on, right? And then they started seeing kind of like more metallic objects, and you know, so it's kind of like the entities that we see have changed over the years. We used to see angels on chariots and fairies and stuff, right? And elves and leprechauns. Now we see fucking robots and spaceships, and it's all kind of science fiction-y kind of stuff now. So I think that there's just always been something here. I doubt that there's travellers from other planets, and you know, I doubt that they're here. I just think that the entities that are being seen have always been here. They live alongside us. They're a bit different, obviously, and and you know, because I mean, look, if these guys were aliens that had flown here in spaceships, classically like the, you know, the Martian invaders and all this kind of stuff, from some distant star system, then they must be excruciatingly advanced. And also, but I don't think you have to, you know, fly gas ships around, and you know, you don't have to use propulsion the way we use propulsion these days to you know, when you get to that level of advancement, right? So I just think they've always been here. There's different types of being. It's like Levin was talking about these kind of gas creatures, and they wouldn't have the perceptual faculties to be able to observe us, right? Because they'd only ever dealt with, you know, what their evolutionary process had led them to deal with, the relevant things to them. You know? And so, you know, I think there's beings of all kinds, and there's probably meta beings that are based on us as cellular units. Yeah. And so this explains things like synchronicity and collections of people gathering together around particular problems or ideas and pushing solutions forward and so on and so forth. It's because there is this desire in the collective mind, whatever it is, to do particular things and to resolve particular problems, right? And I think that can be affected locally by the opinions and points of view and willpower of these individual agents ourselves, just as single cells in the human body can sort of trail off back into the mainstream view, or they can become cancer and develop a smaller kind of light cone, or, you know, dissociate off from the main entity. I think that's probably true for us as well. Yeah, so I'm just going to leave that one there for a bit now. So that's part one complete. I'll produce the next part where we'll talk about sort of the relationship between sort of physics, maths, Pythagoras, sort of astrology, and so on and so forth. There's a hell of a lot to get through on this, actually. The more I think about this, and yeah, thank you very much. Speak soon. Bye.